Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is Explanation of Battle Through the Heavens episode number 127 based on novel. So let's start. Following the mixture of the smoke and his spiritual strength, Xiao Yang swiftly sensed a powerful and terrifying energy swiftly merge with his soul. At the same time, the strength of his soul began to appear as though it had consumed a great tonic as it suddenly strengthened at a rate that caused Xiao Yang to feel shock. With the swift strengthening of his spiritual strength, the swelling pain between Xiao Yang's eyebrows became even more intense. He did not expect this core soul marrow to possess such a powerful strengthening effect on one's spiritual strength. Xiao Yang was helpless in the face of the swelling pain between his eyebrows. He could only watch as he sensed his soul grow stronger. An increasing amount of green-colored smoke surged up. Xiao Yang's soul continued to strengthen with it. At this moment, Xiao Yang truly sensed what a migraine was. The temples on the two sides of his head had begun to throb at this moment. They were just like small drums that continued to beat. It is about to explode. His soul had become so strong that it gradually surpassed the threshold Xiao Yang could endure. Hence, Xiao Yang was finally unable to endure any longer. An intense, painful eardrum explosion was suddenly emitted from deep within his mind. Bang! Xiao Yang's mind was blasted until he was dizzy during this explosion. Gold light covered his vision, and his mind was in complete chaos. This kind of strange situation continued for quite a long period of time before it gradually took a turn for the better. By the time Xiao Yang's mind had recovered his consciousness, the intense pain within his mind had already weakened. He vaguely sensed that his soul seemed to be a couple of times stronger than earlier. However, he was still able to sense that his soul had yet to advance to that so-called soul state. The core soul marrow no longer has any effect. Xiao Yang was involuntarily startled when he sensed this. It was impossible to completely advance to the soul state regardless of how strong one's spiritual strength was alone. As long as one's soul had yet to reach the soul state, one would never be able to refine a genuine Tier 8 medicinal pill. Just when Xiao Yang was stunned because of this, he suddenly sensed the surrounding natural energy be dragged by some strange thing. While it fluctuated, threads of extremely faint flows, that Xiao Yang had a deep impression of, quietly seeped out from the space. After which, they shot explosively to the area between Xiao Yang's eyebrows from all directions. At this moment, Xiao Yang finally discovered that the strange attraction force was being emitted from between his eyebrows. It is indeed useful. Xiaoyan finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw these flows. He had placed all of his hopes on this soul transformation. Just strengthening some spiritual strength was far from able to satisfy him. The spiritual aura continued to surge into the spot between Xiao Yang's eyebrows. Finally, it merged together with the soul that was lingering there. During this merger, Xiao Yang's soul appeared to be soaking in a warm spiritual bath. Warm spiritual strength quietly merged into his soul from every direction. This kind of comfortable feeling caused him to involuntarily let out a moan. The pouring in of this degree of spiritual aura was clearly not enough to cause Xiao Yang's soul to advance to the soul state. Hence, after this kind of absorption lasted for nearly an hour, the strange force from between Xiao Yang's eyebrows suddenly became more intense. In the end, a ripple that was invisible to the naked eye quietly spread out. Finally it flowed out of the stone chamber and launched through the stone hall before scattering in the sky above this mountain. Bang! Following the scattering of this ripple, this mountain immediately appeared like a pot of boiling oil as it suddenly became violent. This sudden violent movement of the sky and land stirred the attention of all the magical beasts on the mountain. However, the mysterious flow of spiritual aura appeared a little too illusionary to them. Other than a small number of powerful high-rank magical beasts vaguely sensing it, the remaining magical beasts were at a loss as they stared at the oscillating surroundings. They were unable to sense anything unusual. Xiongzhan in front of the stone hall had become slightly startled because of this sudden, unexpected change. His eyes swept over the place before pausing on a stone chamber deep within the stone hall, where Xiao Yang was undertaking a retreat. A shocked expression immediately flashed across his eyes. This is the so-called spiritual aura. It is rumored that this kind of thing can only be absorbed by some alchemists who have advanced to the 8th tier. Xiongzhan's eyes slightly flickered. Although he might appear rough, he was very perceptive. After all, this pill realm could be considered the base camp of the pill tower back then. The pill tower had only gradually left due to its current decline. It is unexpected that Xiao Yang really did not lie. He really is going to advance to the 8th tier soon. Xiongzhan spoke to himself in a soft voice. He immediately nodded. If Xiao Yang really advanced to a tier 8 alchemist, Xiongzhan might need to seek his help. Even across the Dochi continent, there were not many tier 8 alchemist guru. All bastards listen up. Chase anyone who appears within a 50-kilometer radius of this place. Xiongzhan suddenly stood up while some thoughts flashed through his heart. A roar resounded unceasingly over this mountain forest. The countless number of magical beasts within the 10,000 medicinal mountain range turned into an uproar upon hearing his orders. Low, deep roars continuously sounded as they began to expel the competitors that were randomly charging into the mountain range. Xiao Yang was naturally unaware of the activity occurring in the outside world. At this moment, he was completely immersed within this dense spiritual aura. This comfortable, soul-deep feeling was like being drunk. It caused one not want to wake up. Due to the entrance of an enormous amount of spiritual aura, a drastic change gradually occurred between his eyebrows. The soul was usually a kind of misty thing that was difficult to describe. It was the foundation of life, and it was extremely mysterious. Ordinarily speaking, the soul between the eyebrows of even an alchemist of Xiao Yang's tier was similar to an illusionary substance. However, their spiritual strength could be used to do a variety of things after having left their bodies. However, after the changes from earlier, the spiritual strength between Xiao Yang's eyebrows no longer appeared like an empty form like in the past. Instead, it had started to adhere together. Occasionally, a slight pulse like one's heart would be visible. Perhaps it was due to the spiritual aura, but the soul between his brows possessed an even greater amount of life force when compared to the past. Due to the enormous spiritual aura pouring in, the soul continuously wiggled, like something was being bred. However, for some unknown reason, Xiao Yang felt that this breeding seemed to lack something. Xiao Yang thought for a moment, but he did not make any headway and only ended up giving up. Following the ripple of this place, a large amount of spiritual aura surged down from the sky. Finally, it surged into a small stone chamber. This empty and secluded stone chamber was filled with an abundant amount of life force once the spiritual aura entered. Xiao Yang's expression within the stone chamber gradually turned ugly due to the increasing amount of spiritual aura pouring in. He had discovered that regardless of the amount of spiritual aura gathering, the soul between his eyebrows ultimately remained in a state where it continued to wiggle around. It appeared as though it was unable to take the final step forward. Xiao Yang tightly knit his eyebrows. He knew that if he was unable to take this final step forward, he would never be able to reach the 8th tier. Just what is missing? Thoughts flew within Xiao Yang's heart as he pondered the problem. At this moment, his soul appeared like a cocoon that needed direction in order to take the final step forward, breaking through the cocoon and transforming into a butterfly, to be successful. Direction? A light suddenly flashed in Xiao Yang's mind as thoughts flowed. That's right, there is no spiritual training method to give it direction. Xiao Yang sighed in relief within his heart after comprehending this point. However, he began to frown again soon after. This spiritual training method, he seemed to only possess the most basic word formula. This word formula. I wonder if it is all right. Xiao Yang's mind was a little uncertain. However, he did not have any other methods at the moment. He swiftly focused his mind. After which, a word formula was gently emitted from his mouth. The limit of soul, shut the heavenly spirit, absorb the spirit forge, the soul. While this short word formula gradually sounded within Xiao Yang's heart, the wiggling soul between his eyebrows appeared to have accelerated. There was something gradually forming in the process. Time was just like water as it quietly flowed by. Within the blink of an eye, it was already the 8th day since Xiao Yang had entered the stone chamber. The unusual phenomenon had gradually disappeared and the stone chamber once again became completely quiet. Zi Yang squatted on the stone stairs outside of the stone chamber. Her small hands were supporting her cheeks as her gaze roamed around in an extremely bored manner. The wait during these few days had really caused her to feel extremely terrible. Why is he still not done? It is rumored that this pill realm is about to shut. Zi Yang softly muttered as her small hand rubbed the ground. Bang! While Zi Yang was muttering to herself, a soul-stirringly loud noise suddenly resounded from the stone chamber. Immediately, the incomparably tough ceiling was cracked apart. An invisible light suddenly erupted from within. It immediately remained in the air. A mighty spiritual strength swept out in a lightning-like manner like a monstrous wave. The expression of Xiongzhan outside of the stone hall suddenly changed when he sensed this vast, mighty spiritual strength. Shock flashed across his eyes. Success. An invisible light remained suspended in the distant sky. A vast and mighty spiritual strength was just like floodwaters as it swiftly swept out in all directions. At this moment, other than a couple of extremely powerful high-rank magical beasts that remained in the mountain range, the other magical beasts sensed an extremely powerful spiritual pressure. Their bodies involuntarily trembled under this intense spiritual pressure. This Xiao Yang is really strong. He has really broken through to the 8th tier. How unbelievable. Xiongzhan looked at the invisible light in the sky. The vast, mighty spiritual strength there caused even him to feel a little afraid. His great strength revealed itself through his physical body. However, if one were to compare their souls, it was likely that two Xiongzhan would not be able to match one Xiao Yang. The river-like spiritual strength continued to spread for a couple of minutes before gradually disappearing. At the same time, that invisible light slowly appeared in front of Xiongzhan's eyes. The light scattered and a human figure vaguely appeared. At a careful glance, it was surprisingly Xiao Yang. However, the body of the current Xiao Yang seemed to be extremely illusionary. This is a soul. Xiongzhan stared at the illusionary Xiao Yang in the sky. His heart was suddenly startled as he softly guessed. Something like the soul was too illusionary and indistinct to the experts of this era. Spiritual strength was also colorless and without form. one would have difficulty detecting and dealing with it. Very few people had seen something similar to a human-shaped soul. After all, forming an illusionary soul into a human form, which did not scatter for a long time, was something that even some elite dozuns had difficulty achieving. The Xiao Yang in the sky shook for a moment before suddenly lowering his head. He looked to the stone chamber on the ground. There was a skinny figure slowly stepping through empty air, walking over. Xiao Yang's eyes swept over the figure and discovered that it was Xiao Yang's physical body. While the physical body walked through the air toward the soul, the Xiao Yang agglomerated by the soul also moved. It walked toward the actual body. The spiritual body would shrink a little each time a foot landed. By the time the spiritual body had arrived in front of his actual body, he had already transformed into a palm-sized cluster of invisible light. After which, it drifted, landed on the actual body's forehead, and disappeared. When the soul once again entered the spot between Xiao Yang's brows, his body slightly trembled. The spiritual pressure in the sky also disappeared at this moment. Xiao Yang's body stood in the sky for a while. His dark black eyes once again recovered his consciousness. He inhaled a deep breath of air and suddenly began to form some seals with his hands. Following which, a mighty spiritual strength spread out from between his brows at a lightning-like speed. Finally, it agglomerated into an invisible spiritual handprint where Xiao Yang's hand was. Big brother Xiongzhan, try and receive a spiritual handprint of mine. A low, deep cry was emitted from Xiao Yang's mouth. Immediately, his eyes turned to Xiongzhan below in an abrupt fashion as he laughed. That handprint, formed by a vast and mighty spiritual pressure, transformed into lightning that rushed over to the top of a mountain where Xiongzhan was located. Ha ha, good. Xiongzhan laughed out loud when he heard Xiao Yang's laughter. Immediately, his large fan-like hand was clenched. Both of his eyes narrowed as he stared at the mighty, invisible strength that flashed across the sky. Bang! That invisible spiritual handprint instantly arrived. After which, it collided violently against the steel-like fist of Xiongzhan. Immediately, a low, deep muffled sound resounded over the entire mountain. The two collided, but the expected energy ripple did not appear. As Xiongzhan threw his fist forward, his expression immediately changed. The strength of the spiritual handprint was not very strong. However, when the two collided, he could sense a faint pain and giddiness suddenly emitted from deep within his head. His feet withdrew, taking 2 steps back before stabilizing his body. Is this a spiritual attack? A grave expression surged up Xiongzhan's face after he stabilized his body. Although he did not use all of his strength earlier, Xiao Yang's strange attack was not something that he could block by just relying on the strength of his physical body because it did not attack one's physical body but one's soul instead. Although this level of attack had great difficulty causing an opponent lethal harm, if one were to suddenly use such an attack during battle, the temporary state of confusion would be enough to cause the battle situation to chain. It is rumored that the alchemists from ancient times were people that even some dochi experts did not dare to randomly offend. Spiritual attacks were difficult to detect and defend against. However, the current alchemists seemed to have lost this kind of training method. Hence, most of them had to rely on the strength of their dochi when battling with others. Xiongzhan revealed an expression of deep thought. He was a magical beast, so he had lived for quite a long time. When the pill realm was still at its peak back then, he was lucky enough to follow a renowned alchemist guru. Hence, he had a certain understanding of things related to alchemists. Haha, big brother Xiongzhan, are you alright? Xiao Yang in the sky slowly descended while Xiongzhan was deep in thought. Finally, he smiled at Xiongzhan and inquired. Xiongzhan also shook off the thoughts in his heart after hearing Xiao Yang's voice. He raised his head and looked at Xiao Yang, only to involuntarily feel slightly startled. He did not know whether it was an illusion, but he sensed Xiao Yang had gained an additional demeanor that was difficult to detect when he looked at him. This kind of feeling was as though he was currently not facing Xiao Yang but his soul. Looks like it should be a change that occurs after having advanced to a tier 8 alchemist. Xiongzhan did not probe too deeply in regards to this. He smiled at Xiao Yang and said, "This attack of brother Xiao Yang is really quite strong. If it was someone at a lower level, it is likely that his consciousness would have been damaged under such a spiritual attack." Xiongzhan's form of address had become much more familiar while speaking to Xiao Yang. Although he was a Dozun class expert, the current Xiao Yang had already advanced into the realm of a tier 8 alchemist guru. There would definitely be things that he needed to request from the other party in the future. Xiao Yang smiled. He did not filter off the slight change in Xiongzhan. He involuntarily sighed emotionally within his heart. The world of the strong was indeed one where strength was honored. These words were especially suitable when used by Xiongzhan, with his forthright character. "You have finally come out." A clear voice suddenly sounded from behind Xiao Yang. That voice naturally belonged to Zi Yang, who had already waited to the point of being frustrated. Xiao Yang turned around. He looked at Zi Yang, grinned, and asked, "How many days have I been in this retreat?" "Nearly 8 days, Zi Yang rolled her eyes as she replied. "If you were a little later, this pill realm would have closed. At that time, you would have also lost the qualification to join the competition." 8 days her. In that case, there is still one more day. Xiao Yang slightly nodded. Exhausting 8 days did not exceed his expectations. He mused for a moment, took the map out of his storage ring, and got his bearings. After which, his eyes turned to the north as he said, I have already gathered all of the task items. All I need to do is hurry to the exit of the pill realm. What about you two? Hearing this, Ziyang spread her hands as she said, we will follow you fist. However, there are members of the pill tower guarding the exit of the pill tower. Therefore, you can only leave first once we get there. I will think of a way to leave myself. Xiao Yang slightly nodded. He was aware of some of Ziyang's abilities. Moreover, she was able to enter this pill realm without anyone knowing. Naturally, she should have the means to leave it. In that case, let's move. There is still some distance until that exit. We must increase our speed in order to reach it before it closes. Yes. Well, you should take care of this first. However, you must not monopolize it. Ziyang suddenly opened her small hand and an emerald green storage ring appeared. The face of Xiongzhan by the side twitched involuntarily when he saw this storage ring. This is. Xiao Yang was a little uncertain. Cough, this contains all the rare medicinal ingredients within the stone hall. Xiongzhan behind Xiao Yang dryly coughed. His tone was a little dry when he spoke. Xiao Yang was speechless when he heard his words. He looked at the urging eyes of Ziyang and involuntarily shook his head with a bitter smile. This little grandaunt was indeed attempting to confiscate the fortune of others. Xiao Yang received the storage ring in passing. It was a lie if Xiao Yang said that he was not interested in all these medicinal ingredients. With this medicinal ingredient warehouse, he would save tons of effort and time when he refined medicinal pills in the future. After all, some of the medicinal ingredients within were quite difficult to find in the outside world. Is big brother Xiongzhan also following? Xiao Yang put the storage ring on his finger, coughed gently, and inquired. Yes. I will still need to rely on this little grandaunt if I wish to leave. Moreover, I will be your bodyguard at the same time. Otherwise, if you end up meeting those fellows from the last time along the way, your situation would be quite bad. Xiongzhan spoke as he unwillingly shifted his eyes away from the storage ring on Xiao Yang's finger. Haha, in that case, I'll trouble big brother Xiongzhan. Xiao Yang involuntarily smiled when he heard this. He cupped his hands to Xiongzhan with gratitude and said, in that case, let's leave immediately. Flying over by ourselves is really too troublesome. Xiongzhan laughed. His mouth suddenly emitted a whistle. Immediately, a clear bird cry resounded over the 10,000 medicinal mountain range. A moment later, an enormous figure flew to the distant mountain range and lingered above the mountain. Let's go. This mysterious bird beast is extremely quick. Moreover, it also saves us effort. Xiongzhan waved his hand at Xiao Yang. After which, his foot stomped on the ground and he rushed up. He steadily landed on the spacious back of the mysterious bird beast. Xiao Yang and Zi Yang closely followed. Cry. The enormous mysterious bird beast emitted a sharp cry. Immediately, it flapped its large wings. It carried a wild wind as it swiftly rushed to the north of the Pill Realm. The exit of the Pill Realm was located in the northern region. There was some distance between it and the 10,000 medicinal mountain range. Fortunately, this mysterious bird beast that Xiongzhan had found was extremely fast. Based on its speed, they should be able to reach the exit within a day. Xiao Yang's group also saw quite a number of competitors hurrying toward the exit along the way. These people were envious of Xiao Yang's group, who were riding on this large bird. With this transportation, it was possible to save an endless amount of trouble. Unfortunately, the magical beasts within this pill realm were all exceptionally violent. Taming them was easier said than done. According to the rules, if one failed to reach the exit before the pill realm was closed, one would lose the qualification to continue participating in the competition. They only had to wait 2 more days before the experts from the pill tower entered the pill realm and brought all those who had remained within back. Hence, in order to get to the exit during this remaining period of time, quite a number of competitors were swiftly hurrying over. Nearly a day's time passed while they were hurrying over. By the time the sky of the next day brightened, an enormous square that was built from large, white stones finally appeared on the ground in the distance. One could even vaguely see some sesame seed-sized black figures on the square. This is the exit of the pill realm, huh? Xiao Yang softly sighed within his heart as he studied the enormous square in the distance. It was fortunate that he had not been delayed. Screech. The mysterious bird beast emitted a sharp cry. It immediately flapped its large wings and created some wild winds as it swiftly swept toward the square. This enormous being, that had suddenly appeared in the sky, caused some of the human figures in the square to throw cautious gazes over. The people present had gained a deep understanding of the magical beasts within this pill realm during these few days. Hence, they did not dare to underestimate the mysterious bird beast after having seen its enormous size. The mysterious bird beast lingered over the square in front of the numerous gazes below. The 3 human figures on it rushed down before their feet landed in the square. Numerous gazes were immediately shot over after these 3 people appeared. Immediately, their eyes contained shock as they swept them over Ziyang and Xiongzhan. These 2 people were disproportionate. It was very difficult for others to treat them as alchemists. Xiao Yang's group did not bother with these gazes. His eyes swept over the square and immediately paused on a couple of familiar figures at the front. A lovely-looking, black-dressed, Cao Ying gracefully stood in the square near the front with her ample figure clearly visible. Her pretty eyes paused on Xiao Yang the moment he appeared. Only after seeing that nothing too serious had happened to him did she softly sigh in relief. The corner of Song Qing's mouth twitched upon hearing her sigh as he stood beside Cao Ying. His face immediately revealed an ashamed expression as he softly said, "Fortunately nothing happened to brother Xiao Yang. I can also rest assured because of this. Yinger, that old fellow had secretly used some hidden force to forcefully push me away. If I had not swiftly reacted, it is likely that the hidden force would have taken my life." Cao Ying rolled her eyes upon hearing this. She covered her mouth and softly laughed. "Senior Song need not blame yourself. Those who had remained behind at that time were only awaiting death. How could Yinger blame you?" Cao Ying's face was covered with smiles when she uttered these words. However, a faint iciness and abomination flashed deep within her pretty eyes. Regardless of how strong she usually acted, she was still a weak woman when faced with a critical life and death moment. All the little actions of those around her would leave a deep impression in her heart. Clearly, Song Qing had been blacklisted within her heart. Song Qing was unable to see the emotion hidden within Cao Ying's eyes. Hence, he sighed in relief. Xiao Yang in the distance swept his eyes across Cao Ying's lovely body, which created an endless enchantment while she frowned. Her enchanting face revealed a rare, warm smile when she saw him looking over. Xiao Yang was stunned by Cao Ying's warm smile. Although this witch usually smiled all the time, her usual smile contained an aloof coldness. It was likely that even Song Qing had never experienced something like this smile. Xiao Yang returned a smile. After all, he had not formed any grudges with Cao Ying, and this woman also possessed an extraordinary future. She might even become a powerful person within the Pill Tower in the future. Establishing a good relationship with her was definitely a good thing. After having crossed eyes with Cao Ying for a moment, Xiao Yang swiftly slid his eyes away. Next, they paused on another position. His eyes suddenly became cold. Old Mu Jiyu. A black-clothed man was seated in a cross-legged fashion at the spot where Xiao Yang's eyes landed. Surprisingly, it was old Mu Jiyu, who had chased Xiao Yang but ended up being forced to withdraw by Xiong Zhon. Old Mu Jiyu sensed him the moment Xiao Yang had appeared. His eyes swept over and paused on the strong-looking Xiong Zhon beside Xiao Yang. His eyebrows were knit as a cold snort was emitted from his nostrils. Lucky fellow. Xiao Yang's eyes were dark and dense as he stared at old Mu Jiyu. A moment later, he slowly withdrew them. Those black-clothed helping out old Mu Jiyu back then had disappeared once again. However, Xiao Yang was aware that they were hidden among the many alchemists here. Looks like this old fellow is also after the 3000 burning flame. Xiao Yang's hand gently rubbed the ring on his finger. After which, he scanned the entire square. While he swept his eyes, he discovered that there were quite a number at the front who were experts of the older generation. The allure of the 3000 burning flame is really too great. In order to obtain it, these people from the older generations can be said to have tossed aside their face. Xiao Yang softly sighed within his heart. This was indeed worthy of being the pill gathering. Without some genuine ability, attempting to stand out in this kind of situation, where all the experts competed with each other, was likely impossible. That young lady called Dan Chen from the Dan clan arrived here a long time ago. This woman is definitely not someone ordinary. Xiao Yang's shifting eyes suddenly paused on a certain spot at the front. Dan Chen, whom he had met a couple of times before, was at that spot. Her eyes was shut as she recuperated. Xiao Yang held this seemingly weak young lady in high regard. He had been unable to sense much when he had previously met her. However, now that he looked at Dan Chen after his soul had advanced to the soul state, he was somewhat shocked to discover that there seemed to be an unusual suction force surging out of the young lady's body. This kind of suction force was unable to absorb Do Qi. Instead, it was used to absorb the soul. When Xiao Yang had made contact with her back then, the unusual suction force he had felt should have been due to this thing. Her constitution should be a little special. Although her spiritual strength is unusually powerful, her body is quite weak. Xiao Yang carefully studied her and immediately contemplated her constitution. There were all sorts of unique things in this world. There would always be some people with unusual constitutions. Some examples were the woeful poison body of the little fairy doctor or the strange eyes of Qing Lin from back then. They are all extraordinary people. Xiao Yang softly shook his head. He could predict that the challenge of this pill gathering would be the most intense one ever. The number of competitors that arrived in this square grew with the flow of time. Moreover, most of the people who arrived were strong. However, this did indeed make sense when one thought about it. How could one not have some abilities after being able to endure in this pill realm, a place of intense competition, until now? Xiao Yang's eyes also swept over the middle of the square while he waited. The space at that spot was somewhat distorted. An old man in clothes representing the pill tower was present near the distorted space. The old man was holding a walking stick, and the skin on his face was just like that on an orange peel. The badge of the pill tower was present on his chest. The tower on it was a bright purple gold one. One of the 8 great elders of the pill tower. Some of the people in the square emitted a soft exclamation when they saw this unique badge. After which, they immediately became silent. The old man with the walking stick ignored the various sounds in the square. He was just like an old monk in meditation and did not speak. At some point his eyelids slightly twitched. Only then did he slowly open his eyes. His eyes randomly swept over the square before he spoke in a faint voice. Time's up. Hand over your medicinal lists and the medicinal ingredients you were tasked to find to the old me. After which, you can leave this place and participate in the final part of the pill gathering competition. The walking stick suddenly cut gently across the distorted space after his voice sounded. A dark black spatial crack slowly appeared. Some commotion occurred in the square after everyone heard the words of the old man with the walking stick. The expressions of quite a number of people became dispirited. Clearly, they did not complete their task this time around. Soon after the words of the old man sounded, an indifferent, middle-aged man took the lead to step forward. After which, he handed the medicinal list and the medicinal ingredients to the old man, who checked the list before slightly nodding. At the same time, that man stepped into the spatial crack and swiftly disappeared. With a person taking the lead, the people behind began to step forward one after another. They handed their things over before successfully entering the spatial line. Of course, there were some among them who had yet to finish their assigned task. They randomly took some medicinal ingredients in order to pass them off as the right items. However, their things had just been taken out when the items were sent flying by the walking stick of the old man. After which, they climbed out with ashen faces. Their faces were bright red. Xiao Yang turned his head after seeing Cao Ying and the rest beginning to enter the fissure. He said to Zi Yang, "I will make a move first. We will gather after we leave." "Yes." Xiao Yang smiled when he heard her reply. He tidied his robes and swiftly walked up to the old man in front of the many envious gazes around him. After which, he took out the medicinal list and medicinal ingredients from his storage ring. The old man received them and checked them over before randomly glancing at Xiao Yang and nodding slightly. "Enter." Xiao Yang respectfully cupped his hands to the old man. After which, his eyes turned to the dark black spatial line. A quiet, gentle breath was being inhaled in his heart. He was finally another step closer to the 3,000 burning flame. This place was a stadium that was so large that it caused one to feel astounded. A densely packed sea of people covered the ground as far as one could see. An earth-shaking, boiling noise resounded across the sky like the roar of a large dragon. Under this terrifying sonic wave, even the cloud layer in the sky had been destroyed until only pieces were left. Many stone platforms floated in the air above the square. These stone platforms were the most dazzling because the final face-off of this pill gathering would occur on them. After the somewhat low spirits of the last few days, the liveness of the square had undoubtedly reached a peak because today was the day that the pill realm was opening. Only those alchemists who had successfully walked out of the pill realm would possess the qualification to continue participating in the pill gathering. The atmosphere of the open ground was fiery hot. A countless number of gazes were focused on the middle of the square. There was an enormous door that was constructed using black rocks at that spot. The spatial ripple at the large door had revealed a distorted feeling. This was the exit of the pill realm. Soon after, the competitors who had successfully passed the second hurdle would be walking out of there. The little fairy doctors group's eyes were focused on the large spatial door on the tall stage of the stadium. Their faces contained a slight anxiety. Although they were confident in Xiao Yang's abilities, they were also aware of the intensity of the competition in the pill realm. There is no need to worry. Many competitors have shattered their spatial stones and come out during this period of time. If Xiao Yang had come out, he would definitely have come looking for us. Yi Zhong by the side smiled when he saw their eyes, so he spoke in a comforting manner. Immediately, he felt that these words were not really appropriate. He dryly laughed and said, "Moreover, with Xiao Yang's intelligence, passing the second hurdle should not be much of a problem." The little fairy doctor could only helplessly shake her head in the face of Yi Zhong's comfort. She was just about to speak when her pretty eyes suddenly swept to the square. The spatial door at the spot had suddenly emitted waves of intense spatial ripples. The large spatial door has been opened. The sea of people that stretched endlessly immediately emitted a soul-stirring cheer when the spatial ripple appeared. Immediately, a countless number of heated eyes swung around. After which, they paused on the large spatial door. All the eyes present looked down as the fluctuation from the spatial door became more intense. In the end, numerous figures began to slowly walk out. Their legs landed on the ground of the square amid the cheers of everyone present. A deafening cheer erupted from the viewing gallery when they watched these competitors successfully come out. Those who could arrive at this place were already considered among the top alchemists across the entire continent. Even if they were to give up participating in the competition now, they would still be treated as VIPs by some factions. The cheers grew louder as more and more human figures walked out of the spatial door one after another. The large square trembled under this terrifying sound. Bang! The spatial door rippled once again. Immediately, an extremely eye-catching, graceful figure slowly walked out. Finally, the figure was exposed under the warm sunlight. Immediately, the cheers in the arena reached a high tide. The name Cao Ying was quite renowned. Everyone knew that she had the ability to compete for the champion spot this time around. Compared to Cao Ying, the limelight that Song Qing enjoyed was clearly dimmer. Even though he was also considered a genius, he ultimately had difficulty competing with the limelight of demonic talent. A large group of people walked out after Cao Ying. However, the little fairy doctors group was unable to find Xiao Yang's figure no matter how they searched. Her pretty face immediately changed a little and her hands involuntarily tightened. If any accident were to occur to Xiao Yang within the pill realm, it was difficult to imagine just what kind of madness she would descend into. Yi Zhong by the side did not dare to say anything as he looked at the little fairy doctor's darkening face. His heart was beginning to feel uncertain. The greatest enemy within the pill realm was not the magical beasts within it but the other competitors. In order to enable oneself to gain an additional chance to succeed, some strong people would likely kill the competitors who could threaten them. Other places were filled with joyful, earth-shaking cheers, but this small area appeared exceptionally quiet. At this moment, even Tian Huazunja had involuntarily knit his eyebrows. His finger, which had originally been placed together, had parted without him realizing it. The spatial large door once again rippled when the hearts of the little fairy doctor and the rest had sunk. A skinny figure slowly appeared. Finally, he stepped out of the large spatial door and landed on the ground. It's big brother Xiao Yang, Xin Lan hurriedly cried out. A joy quickly surfaced on her face when she saw this skinny figure. The hearts of the little fairy doctor's group shook when they heard her voice. Their eyes swiftly looked over and did indeed see an unusually familiar figure. Immediately, the few of them sighed in relief. Cuckoo, I have already said that it is impossible for Xiao Yang to not be able to pass this second hurdle with his strength. The heavy burden in Yi Zhong's heart was lifted at this moment as he laughed. Xiao Yang, who was walking out of the large spatial door, suddenly turned his eyes over while everything was sighing in relief. He immediately smiled and nodded to the group. This fellow. The little fairy doctor involuntarily shook her head and spoke in a soft, helpless manner when she saw Xiao Yang's energetic appearance. Xiao Yang was involuntarily a little absent-minded as he heard the surrounding loud voices from the middle of the square. The time he had spent within the pill realm had indeed been quiet, but it had seemed to be lacking something. Only now that he had left did he realize that the pill realm lacked people. Xiao Yang's eyes swept in all directions as he stood on the square. He looked at the spatial large door that was still continuously spitting out people. His eyes involuntarily became a little surprised. The numbers on this square reached at least 1,000. He did not expect so many people to last after those 2 elimination rounds. An alchemist gathering involving such numbers was something that even the Jioma Empire Alchemist Grand Meeting back then was far from being able to compare with. Of course, this was not only in terms of numbers. There was also a difference in quality. Any random person in this place would easily be able to be the champion of that Alchemist Grand Meeting. Xiao Yang's sweeping eyes suddenly paused on the highest seats in the square a moment later. That spot contained a vast, mighty aura that caused even Xiao Yang to feel some pressure. The 3 giant heads of the pill tower her. Xiao Yang's eyes swept over those 3 figures. He was a little startled because he discovered the pretty woman in Cheongsam, whom he had never met before, carefully studying him. Although Xiao Yang had never met this pretty woman, he was aware of her status just from the place she was standing. His heart was slightly shocked. An existence of this level was not someone the current him could offend. Hence, he did not dare to pause his eyes for too long. All he did was glance over before quickly shifting his eyes away. Is he Xiao Yang? Yarrow Chen's disciple? The pretty woman stared at Xiao Yang from the tall platform, which had everyone's attention, before she suddenly inquired. Ha, yup, his Xiao Yang. Shen Kongzi by the side smiled and nodded. His eyes swept over Xiao Yang and his expression suddenly changed. A surprised gasp was emitted from his mouth. Have you discovered it? The spiritual ripple of this little fellow seems to be a little unusual. If I have guessed correctly, he should have already touched the soul state. The pretty woman slightly smiled and softly spoke. It does have some appearance of the soul state. The dark-skinned elder by her side also nodded in a somewhat stern manner. Surprise flashed across his face as he said, the eyesight of this old fellow Yarrow Chen is really good. How envious. If he has really advanced to the soul state, even Cao Ying and Dan Zhan would have some difficulty defeating him in this pill gathering. The pretty woman laughed. Shen Kongzi nodded. Xiao Yang had not gave him such a feeling when he had last met him. Clearly, this kind of transformation should be related to this trip to the pill realm. Can it really be so tough to beat that old fellow once? The spatial door in the square continued to ripple for nearly half an hour before it finally slowed. The distorted space ripple slowly disappeared. The spatial large door once again recovered its calmness. The number of competitors in the square had increased significantly by the time the spatial door was shut. This caused Xiao Yang's heart to be slightly startled. These people seemed to be outstanding alchemists who had come from all over the Dochi continent. One would have to step over the heads of all these people in order to become the pill-gathering champion. That person would have to climb up step by step until they reached the peak. The originally noisy square had become much quieter the moment the large spatial door was shut. Everyone knew that what occurred next would be the main event of this pill gathering. Shen Kongzi's eyes swept over the square from the tall stage. His gentle cough resounded by the side of everyone's ears, causing everyone's eyes to gather on him. First of all, congratulations to all of you who are able to stand here. You have all passed the second round of eliminations. However, you should all be aware that this next round is the most important event of the pill gathering. The one who can stand until the end will become the champion this time around. The stone platforms in the sky are the stages for you to perform. Hopefully, you will be able to unleash the brightest moment in your life at that spot. Glory will be born amid all of you. This short speech was just like the spark that lit the explosives. Suddenly, the open ground boiled. The grandest meeting within the alchemist world had finally arrived at this moment. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.